Alright guys, welcome back to another video on the LeetCodes channel. Today we're going to be solving LeetCode number 217, which is another question on the NeetCode 150 list. And in this question, if we're given an integer array nums, so we can consider the first example over here, right? We want to return true if any value appears at least twice. So in this case, 1 appears twice in the array, and then we would return true. But in the other example, we would return false just because there are no duplicate elements in the array. And that is essentially the whole problem. Alright guys, so the first solution that takes a little bit more time but less space would be just sorting the list before checking if we can find any duplicates. Now, for example, if nums was equal to 1, 2, 3, 1, like in the first example, after a sort, it would be equal to 1, 1, 2, 3. Now, with sorting, what we know that will happen is that if an element matches another element, they will be right next to each other, essentially. So when trying to find a duplicate, what we can do is simply start at the first element of the array and essentially have some sort of sliding window where when we're at the first index, we check the second index to see if the value matches. Okay, and then the same thing when we're at the second index. We want to check if the second index matches the third index, and then we want to check if the third index matches the fourth index, which is all that we're doing in this algorithm. And if the second last index doesn't match the last index, then all we do is return false. Now the time complexity of this algorithm, as stated, is O of n log n, and the space complexity is O of 1, just because we have no extra space, and the sort takes O of n log n time. Alright, now the next solution, which takes a little less time but more space, would be to use a hash set. So essentially the idea behind it is if we have an array nums, which again we'll use the first example, so 1, 2, 3, 1. So if we have this array, what we want to do is create some sort of visited set so that as we iterate through the array, the visited set will keep track of the elements in the list to the left of the current index. So if we're at 1, the elements of the list to the left of 1 would be nothing. And then if we're at 2, it would be it would just be 1. If we're at 3, it would be 2 and 1. And then if we're at 1, it would be 1, 2, and 3. Now we can leverage this because we know 1 is already in the visited set that we'll be keeping track of. So in this case, the visited set, once we hit 1, would look something like this. 1, 2, 3 would look like this. And then what we would do is we would just search for 1 in the visited set, which is a constant time lookup, and that's it. So once we find that 1, we know that there was already a 1 in the set, and then we can return true because there's a duplicate. Now if we don't find any duplicates, then we just return false. And the time complexity of this algorithm is O of n, for the reason that we just iterate through the list at most once, and then the space complexity of this algorithm is O of n, since every element in the nums array could be entered into the visited set. Alright guys, now for the first coding solution. In this solution we will just be first sorting nums, so nums.sort. Alright, and now we essentially want to verify that either there is a sliding window that has a pair where the values match, or there is no such sliding window. And we can do that just by iterating through the range from 0 to the second last element in nums, so length of nums minus 1. And then what we want to do is we want to compare the element at index I with the element at its next index. So if nums at index I equals nums at index I plus 1, in this case we know that there exists a sliding window such that adjacent elements are equal, and thus there's a duplicate. So we just want to return true, and then if we get through each sliding window without finding a duplicate, we just return false. And that's the entire solution for sorting. We can submit this. Right, so there actually was a small syntax error. I did not put the in, so for I in range, length of nums minus 1 is what it should have been. So if we resubmit, now we get the correct solution. Alright, so for the coding solution, all we do is we start with our visited set, and then we iterate through each of the elements in nums. So for num in nums, we want to first check if the num is actually in our visited set, and if it is in our visited set, what we want to do is return true, because now we know that there is a duplicate element. But if not, what we want to do is we want to add this element into the visited set for future reference. And then now if we get to the last element in the list without first finding any elements that have duplicates, and the last element does not have a duplicate, then we know that no element in the list has a duplicate, so we can just return false in this case. And that's the whole solution. If we submit, and there we go. So that's the entire solution. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.